Okay, thanks, Hannah. Our next speaker is Richard Dennis. As you can see from the webpage, he's going to talk about the misuse of economics in environmental policy, case for designing a emission scheme for New Zealand.
Yep.
Thank you, Richard.
Thanks. Before I get started about that, who here lives in a share house? Like you share a house with other students or friends? Yeah? Most of you? A lot of you? Who's got their own shelf in the fridge? Who's got a communal fridge? There's your commons problem. Most of you will then wind up having your own shelf in the fridge because your flatmates keep stealing your milk. You, of course, will keep stealing their milk, but of course that will be entirely justified because they stole yours first. And in a small number of households, you will either A, trust each other, or B, think the space constraint of only having one shelf is not worth the hassle of having to pay $2 for some milk that you didn't get to drink any of anyway. And different households will come up with different solutions. Most families don't have their own shelves in the fridge. Most share households do. Why? All sorts of interesting reasons, usually around trust and senses of obligation and sharing. And in terms of what Hannah's been talking about in terms of, fisheries or Milky Ways, and of course Hannah left out the most important variable of all, which is theft. So I'm just going to eat that before it can be taken back off me. Because
when rules break down,
if you want to talk about fisheries in the Pacific, you're talking about theft. Because the reality is, as a society, we set up all sorts of boundaries for people that we don't enforce. We actually rely, that's quite good, we actually rely on social norms to do most of our enforcement for us. So we make all sorts of laws about how you should and shouldn't behave. From you shouldn't steal, from you should pay tax, from you shouldn't speed. And people break the law all the time. But most people don't break the law most of the time. And if they do, as a society, we usually spend more money on enforcement, or we turn a blind eye to it and think it's a dumb rule in the first place, or we change the rules. Economists typically ignore, or at best don't pay enough attention to, the kind of social norms that place pressure on people not to behave what an economist would call rationally. Economists, let me go back a step. When I talk about economists today, I'm going to talk about how economists are typically portrayed, and I think are fairly portrayed. But there's actually a lot of good economics that if you're interested, you can go and sort of convince most economists that they're talking rubbish. But most economists will argue that consumers behave rationally. That is, that they will make decisions that are in their selfish best interest. And there's all sorts of evidence to suggest that people do that sometimes. And there's all sorts of reasons to suggest that individuals are best placed to make a whole bunch of decisions themselves. If I go into a restaurant and there's a menu, I reckon I'm better at picking what I feel like for dinner than you're better at picking it for me, or that some faceless bureaucrat, red tape nanny status somewhere, wants to tell me what I should eat. Thank God for choice. I can choose what I want for dinner. But the fact that individuals are good at making some choices for themselves doesn't mean that individuals, A, are good at making all choices for themselves, or B, that some choices are best left for individuals. And the main thing for you to get your head around is that you should never allow other people or yourself to try and answer a very simple but dumb question, which is, are individuals better or worse at making decisions than collective? Because the answer is, well, sometimes individuals are much better, and sometimes they're much better collectively. The fight that we have in society and within the economics discipline typically is, are individuals better or worse than collectives that make decisions? And it doesn't ever get resolved. The interesting question is, under what circumstances are individuals better at making decisions? Under what circumstances are decisions best made collectively? And what do we do in the fuzzy grey area in the middle? That's an interesting question. That can get you some good economics. that can get you some good environmental outcomes, and it can also lead to better improved policies as they relate to a whole range of problems. Get forced into a binary choice between is choice good or bad, are individuals better or worse than an oppressive state, and you'll just find yourself talking in circles and not getting very far. An economist would have predicted that an individual acting in their own self-interest, and I'm surprised out of the 4, one of them didn't do it just to make it fun, just put their hand up for 4 every time. Why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you just assume that your sucker colleagues will be all self-contained, and you keep getting 4, you get a heap, and at the end you win the whole booty. And then you can go give them to your friends if you want to.
Next year you'd have nothing.
No, not necessarily, because your sucker colleagues might, on learning, gee, it's getting worse and worse, I better not ask for meek little 2, I better only ask for 1. Or I keep going for 4. That's how an economist assumes, not based on evidence, that's how an economist assumes individuals make all their decisions. And clearly when we look around in society, people don't. And that raises a whole bunch of issues about whether economic instruments are better or worse than a whole range of other instruments who are addressing environmental as well as a whole range of social problems. So for example, you talked about water at the beginning, Richard, that someone spent $1,000 on lawn and they thought to themselves, well, I'm not going to pay $15, you know, for the water bill. Well, economists would say that's a brilliant decision, because the $1,000 is what we call a sunk cost. Forget it, it's gone, you spent it, you can't change that. The issue you have to ask yourself is, look at the marginal cost of buying water, $15 a week, $15 a month, versus the marginal benefit of having a lawn. The fact that you already made a bad decision in planting your lawn, to an economist that should be irrelevant. And when I say should, I mean economists have got this abstract notion of the rational individual that makes all these rational choices. As a society, we don't behave that way, and that means that we can get our predictions wrong sometimes, but we can also overemphasize certain policy instruments. If we, for example, rely very heavily on price instruments to control consumption of water, say we double the price of water, most people won't change their behaviour at all, because weekly expenditure on water is a couple of bucks. I mean, most people spend more on a couple of bottles of water each day, because it's really hard to remember that humans get thirsty. So how could you, day after day, think to yourself, I might get thirsty today, I might carry some water with me? It's beyond the wit of man. So we go out into the world each day, get surprised by the fact that we've become thirsty, and pay between $7 and $10 a litre for some water. Do we really expect that when we increase the price of water at home for watering the lawn, or for drinking, and it's safer, talk about that if you want, at the moment we pay about $1 per 1,000 litres of water out of your tap at home. You double that, $2 per 1,000 litres, people don't care. So if you want to change people's consumption of water at home with lawns through price, you're going to have to put the price of water very high. Or you can do something nanny-statist and red-tapist and interventionist and almost like communism by saying we're going to have restrictions on how you can use your water. You can't water your lawn, you can only water your lawn once a week, you can only water your lawn certain hours. From a policymaker's point of view, that's a choice. And there's 2 different ways of framing the choice. Which policy instrument is the most effective way of reducing water consumption? Or which policy instrument fits my sort of world view for how the world should be, and what the role of government should be, and how rational individuals should behave. So if you really like the worldview that says individuals will always make smart decisions, and that governments are oppressive enterprises that are just there to stifle individuality and choice, then you like the idea of bumping up the price. Now, I'm not saying either choice is right or wrong,